All right, hey, so we're in our Against All Odds series. We're going to be in Job today. If you don't know where Job is, that's fine. Just go to your index, find the page number, swipe to your Bible app, whatever it is. But we're going to be there a little bit today, and those of you who've maybe spent like any time in Job, you're like, oh, great, this should be good. But we've been talking for a few weeks through our Against All Odds series, and through this series, we've been talking about, hey, no matter what culture says, even if it believes something differently, about what goodness is, about what integrity is, even if it deals frequently in the grays, man, we as the people of God are going to stand on truth. And so we're going to define our goodness by who God is. And we talked about in week 1, if we're to define goodness by who God is and we're to pursue goodness, then we want to walk with God like Enoch does. We talked about in week 2, man, walking with God means that we're going to have to be obedient to him like Noah is. And then in week 3, we talked about, man, but when we walk with God, when we're obedient to God, then we're going to look different. That if we have integrity, we should look different. And I want to start with this tonight, and it's simply this. We are not good in the pursuit of God's favor. We are good because we have God's favor. We choose to be good in response to the favor and the love of God. And I want to start with that because sometimes anytime we talk about goodness and stuff like that, sometimes, especially if you haven't been in the church for very long or anything like that, you're like, oh, the church is just trying to be good people, and I can be a good person without the Lord. And we're not trying to be good people. We are trying to worship the Lord with our lives. We're trying to glorify him. And so tonight's going to be a little bit different because we're going to look at these first 3 things. And we talk about these first 3 things, and here's the deal about these first 3 things that we've talked about through 3 weeks. Is that they're very easy to do when life is easy. Okay, when life is easy, man, it's kind of easy to walk with God. It's easy to be obedient to him. It's easy to look different because there's not any pressure on you. But tonight we're going to talk about, man, but what happens when life gets hard? And the reality is we've lived life long enough. Why is life so hard? And who does it make me when it gets hard? What becomes of me, and what will that say about me? So as we approach Christmas time, one of my favorite memories growing up was going back to Little Rock, Arkansas, okay? And if you've never been to Little Rock, Arkansas, it's like one of the top 10 most dangerous cities in the country, okay? Like I can remember being like, oh, I want to go see like a movie after 7 o'clock, and they were like, no! Like, what's going to happen at the movie theater? They were like, you can't go! I was like, okay. Like I remember driving around and being like, we need to go home. Like apparently ghosts and goblins and all kinds of stuff just broke out at night, and like everything terrible happened. So it wasn't like like Little Rock was not Florida, like we're going to Disney World. But I enjoyed going back and seeing family. And I enjoyed going back and seeing family and my cousins, but I also really enjoyed going back because it got cold up there. And I grew up in Georgetown, which is just Central Texas right here, and it didn't get cold. It like snowed once in my childhood. It's like a faint, fleeting memory. But there were chances that it could snow or like at least ice, which that's when you know like you want it to be like, you're like, I'll settle for ice. I don't even need the fluffy stuff. Just give me like the hard stuff that people can like bust their heads open on. And so we would go up and we'd go for Christmas. And I remember one Christmas, it was awesome because it was like the coldest Christmas ever, and everything iced. And my Nana, which is what I affectionately call my grandmother, even at the age of 25, woohoo, adulthood. And she lived like at the top of this giant hill, and so we would go sledding down this hill, down ice, which is a really good idea until you realize you have to get back up the ice hill, and you're just like slipping and falling. Like I think I live at the bottom of the hill now, and everything's cold, and it's so cold that the power goes out. Okay, like it's so cold that Little Rock, Arkansas is not equipped for the cold, and so the frozenness is like frozen all the power system, stuff like that. And so lights are out, heating is out, which heating is a really bad thing to go out when you're in 6th grade and you weigh 97 pounds, and it's 20 degrees outside, it's like 22 degrees inside, you've got like 17 blankets. You're just like, please don't take me yet. And I remember that Christmas because it got really, really cold, and we loved playing board games as a family, right? Like we, and not like super fun ones, not like the ones that Bubba plays as like his shelves all over his walls, but like Phase 10, Skip Bo, a little marble game called Wahoo. Does anybody know what that is? Yeah. Okay. Sometimes I feel like that's just my family. It's good to know that it's not just us, except for like we're so cool that we have like a handmade wooden carved Wahoo board. Thank you. Okay. So we'd play games like that. And so the lights go out, the power's out, we're freezing, there's nothing to do, and we don't break out Wahoo, unfortunately. We break out our next favorite game, which is Monopoly Junior. Okay, Monopoly Junior, because Monopoly takes too much patience, right? Like you've been in that game where you've got like 17 hotels stacked up and you're like, is anybody gonna run out of money anytime soon? It's like 7 hours later, you haven't eaten a meal, someone's like died on the side, you're like, oh no. And so we play Monopoly Junior because instead of dealing in like, 500,000, stuff like that, we're just dealing in like ones and fives and small amounts of money. We got candles everywhere, right? Like it looks like we're summoning in something. It's very weird. And we're playing Monopoly Junior. And all of a sudden, me and my cousin Josh are just destroying my cousin Sydney, okay? Like, we own every property on the board, and she owns, like, the first 2 little spaces past go. Okay, like, that's keeping her alive. And so we're coming around the board, and it doesn't take very long before, like, we see on the other side she's out of money, right? And out of money means, like, the game is over for you. You lose, let the champions play this one out, okay? And we just kind of look over it, and we're like, yes, Sydney's gone. She was 2 years older than us, so just beating her was so much fun at anything possible. Because, like, she hit puberty before the rest of us. Like, she could beat me in basketball. Now I'm 6'2", she's 5'4", so we've moved on in life. But we look at her, and we're like, you've lost. And she goes, oh, have I? And pulls a $1 bill out of her sleeve like Hermione Granger. And I'm like, what are you doing? Where did that come from? And I look at her, I'm like, what, where is that? And she goes, I've had this the whole time. I'm still in. And I'm like, oh. And so we play the game. And this is how the game keeps going for like the next 20, 30, 45 minutes. We'd be like, yeah, Sydney's done. She's gone. And she'd be like, oh, am I? And we're like, where are these $1 bills coming from the Monopoly Junior game? Like, they don't even print that much money. And it doesn't take very long before we realize that's the same dollar bill. She refuses to give up that dollar bill. She just hides it randomly during the game. Like, we get sidetracked, and she's like, and he goes back for it for later. And it was, like, hilarious. I think when me and my wife go back for Christmas, I'm going to break out the Monopoly Junior game, and I think if we pull it out, if it's still there, we'll blow the dust off it. There will be a dollar bill in there, and it will say, Sydney's won. Because if she was so adamant, she was like, this is mine forever, and like writes on it. And it was hilarious, and it was funny, and we laugh about it. Like, we tell that story, and we talk about it, like, oh man, remember that night that everything was awful? We had to play Monopoly Junior, and you cheated the whole time? But the reality of that story is this. As people, man, we hate failure, we hate losing so much that we will do anything to not have to accept that end. Right, like it was a funny story and it's in a game, but the reality is like she had to cheat every single turn. Okay, you don't make it very long in Monopoly Junior owning the first 2 places that literally cost like $1 each, which is not how land works, unfortunately, I found out in adulthood. She had to cheat, man, just every single time. And as people, we hate struggling. We hate losing, we hate failing, we hate all those things. And as we talk about integrity through 3 weeks, man, it's really easy to have integrity and to choose goodness and to choose the right thing when life is really easy. But here's the truth. When we start to feel like we're losing, when life starts to get hard, when things start to get difficult, that is when we're willing to sacrifice integrity. That's when we're willing to stop pursuing goodness. Okay, we don't start cheating in class when we're making all A's and we're in all AP and we're just crushing it. We start cheating in class when our schedules get busy and we start struggling really hard and we start seeing like our college future slip away. That's when we sacrifice our integrity and we cheat. Most of us don't just start lying for fun because we're like, oh, just everything out of my mouth is a lie. No, we start lying when things go bad and we don't want to get caught, we don't want to accept consequences. That's when we sacrifice integrity. It's when things get hard, when things get difficult, that we find out what kind of person we are. That when the odds literally start to stack against us and it feels like we're drowning and everything around us is going terribly, man, we find out what kind of person we are because we hate struggling. And there are 2 things that we do when we struggle or we're failing or anything like that. When we're suffering, when things are going bad, when everything at home seems broken, when our friendships seem broken, we didn't make the team we wanted to do, and our team isn't doing as well as we thought they would, or whatever, there are 2 things. One of them is that we will do anything at all costs to get ahead. So that's when we cheat, that's when we lie. We want to just skip past the struggle and get into things going easy again. The second thing is we will do anything and everything to avoid pain or having to think about that struggle. That's where we get, there's a term, it's called like at-risk youths. The reason they are at risk is because everything around them is going not great. And so they are at risk of drugs, alcohol, sexual issues, all of those things. That things get bad, and so they will do anything to not feel or not endure that pain or that struggle. And for some of us, like, that's very real. Like we have like a 5-minute drive home later and we realize that life is very hard. Some of us not so much, right? Maybe right now things are going great. You're like, man, I'm coasting through high school. What is the problem? But some of us have some really, really big struggles and some hard things happening. And those of us that don't, they will come. They will come. And we have to begin to work in ourselves and figure out, man, what kind of person are we? And how are we going to handle that? And how are we going to walk with that? And we talk about that because we're going to look at the story of Job. And the story of Job is not a bedtime story. Okay, like we don't read this one like, oh, that's sweet. Job's story is so happy. We read the story of Job because Job, by all accounts, is a good person. As a matter of fact, he's like the best person living. He is called righteous. He, above everyone, fears God. And we see this exchange between Satan and God, and it's kind of like really weird if we're being honest, because Satan is asking permission to corrupt the people of God, and God is like, hey man, I trust my servant Job so much, you can do whatever you want to him, and he will never let go of his integrity. Anything bad that happens, we go, man, that's kind of like a weird narrative, and the best that we can pull from that is this, man, life just gets hard. There are bad things all around us always happening, and the goal of God is not to keep us from those things. And we're going to look at that in a little bit, but we see kind of this discussion. And we find ourselves in Job chapter 2, verse 1. It says this, on another day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before him. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. So at this point, Job has lost all of his family. He's lost all of his finances. He's lost all of his crops, everything. There is nothing externally that Job has anymore. It says this in verse 4. Skin for skin, Satan replied. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, very well then, he's in your hands, but you must spare his life. So at this point, all is fair. Anything can happen to Job except for death. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. He replied, you are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. We see this with Job, man. Like his life is worse than all of ours. He loses everything externally, and then all his health, his bodily functions, and sores start to break out. So all of that is now terrible. And the woman that is his wife, that is the most intimate and personal person to him, that is supposed to support him in the faith and encourage him towards God, has now turned against him and is now encouraging him to abandon God. There is no darker place than where Job is at. He is in the darkest of the dark. You say, Lane, you don't know what's going on. No, Job is in the darkest of the dark. It does not get worse. And yet, when his wife, which if anyone can persuade a man to do anything, it is his wife. Trust me. Looks at him and says, curse God. Abandon God. And Job says no. Because sometimes bad stuff happens. And we have to accept the good with the bad because he is God and his ways are above our ways and he is above us. Here's the deal. Job is different than us because we have a poor view of struggle. We see struggle and we want to avoid it. We want to get around it. We want to skip it. You've maybe even had a conversation like, I don't think life is supposed to be this hard, or I don't think this is supposed to be this hard. We don't want anything to be hard, okay? We sit on our cell phones and I do this too. And if a web page doesn't load fast enough, we're 2 seconds from throwing it out the window. Even though it's got to send a signal to space and back, and we're like, stupid technology. Okay, there were dial-up days where I had to come home and be like, hey, Mom, you don't plan on being on the phone, do you? Because I'm going to be on the internet playing Snake. And she was like, oh, I guess not. We're the most impatient that they come. And so when anything gets hard or anything gets a struggle or anything is even a little bit frustrating, we want to get past it. We want to avoid it because we go, man, life isn't supposed to be this hard. And I tell you, yeah, it is. Life is stupid hard. Life is hard and then you die. Like that is the reality of it. It doesn't tweet well, but it's very difficult. And so, and some of you, man, like you know this, you get this, you're like, oh, okay, so my struggle is normal. Yes. Struggle is normal. Difficulty is normal. It being hard is normal. And if you think that everybody else's life isn't hard, just shut off Instagram because everything out there is a lie anyway. No one publishes misery. No one's like, man, today was awful. Selfie. Nobody. But life is insanely hard, and when it gets hard, we will find out who we are. When life gets hard for Job, we find out who he is. And listen, Job doesn't have friends around him that are good. Throughout the next 40 chapters, Job's friends are telling him to turn on God. As a matter of fact, they're basically communicating with Job and saying, maybe this is karma, which is not a real thing, by the way. God does not deal in karma. And they're like, maybe this is kind of that thing. You must have done something wrong to get this. And Job is like, no, this isn't about that I did something wrong and so I receive a wrong thing. This is about life is hard and bad things happen, and we have to glorify God in the midst of it. Because how you walk with God in the midst of hard times speaks more to who he is than how you walk with him in joy and easy things. Anyone can look and go, well, of course they love God. Everything is great for them. That's actually what Satan does. He says, of course Job is your best servant. Nothing is going wrong for him. And so God calls his bluff and says, okay, make it miserable. And Job still calls on God. He does not sacrifice his integrity. And some of us maybe aren't going to get to like our point where things get bad all around us and things are hard and we're just like, curses God! Right? Like your parents are going to come home and be like, what is going on with my teenager? They're weirder than I thought. But some of us will abandon the things of God and we will stop following God and we will walk away from God, which is the same thing. That is the truth of our integrity. The cross of Jesus is the best picture that we are not promised anything easy. Nothing. We're not promised rainbows and butterflies and worship songs where our hands are raised all the time. We're actually promised that things will be awful sometimes. And that God is going to walk with us in those things. And that we are to walk with God in those things. And as a matter of fact, God even knows that people will see that. Job's friends get so frustrated with Job because he will not turn his back on God. Now, he gets ticked. Okay, he fights with God. He lets God know what's going on. He is mad. He is frustrated. And he has no problem taking his issues to God. He wonders, man, why is this on me? But he never turns on him. He always comes back to this moment where he's like, but you are God and you are above my ways. I'm really, really mad, shaking his tiny, tiny fist in the face of God. I mean, in this moment, he's mourning all of his affliction around him. And his friends say, well, why don't you just turn your back on God? Why don't you just regard God? And he says, man, I can't do that. And in the end, there's this dialogue between God and Job and his friends. And God looks at his friends and goes, man, Job better pray for you because I will hear his words. And when Job prays for you, I will hear his words and I will not deal with you in accordance of what you deserve. I mean, Job's righteousness is so big through it all that God sees it and uses it as an example for all the people around him. And that's what happens with us. I mean, when we walk through struggle, when people see that you're going through hard things and you're walking with God, people notice. That is actually the one time that they might actually notice. Let's get real for a sec. Is that cool with y'all? When you're a youth pastor, minister, director, whatever label you want to give me, it's easy to stand up here and talk about things and talk about scripture and talk about truth and talk about things getting hard. And I remember being a teenager and being like, the youth pastor doesn't know what's hard. He's one of God's. So I'll take you back to senior year. We all have our Job moments. We all have a part in our lives that we kind of feel like Job, that things get really hard and the struggle is very real. And I've shared in the high school service before, we talked about my senior year and how going through at the beginning of the year, like I get dumped by a longtime girlfriend, which, like, praise Jesus now. Looking back, though, in that time, it was really difficult. And then in November, at the end of my senior year cross-country season, I get a call that one of my good friends, who hasn't even been at college for a semester, has died in a car accident. And so I'm attending a funeral at 18 years old with all my best friends before we go to regionals to race. Like, we're literally funeral bus Arlington. And then at the very end of my season, I remember December 23rd coming into Christmas, and my mom had been in the hospital for a lot of stuff. We had found out that she had had brain cancer. And it's December 23rd. I've been living at home alone as a senior in high school at this point pretty frequently because my dad's going back and forth between Houston and Austin and going to all these treatments and stuff, and we're sitting there, and it's me, and it's my family. And we sit down, and we have a conversation where my mom has to, and very articulately, I might add, explain to us that people with her cancer have never lived 3 months past diagnosis. And so at 18, I'm doing the math, and I'm sitting there 2 days before Christmas. I'm going to get 3 months. That's March. That means mom's not there at prom. Mom's not there at graduation. Mom's not there for college. Not there for wedding, any of those things. I'm 25. I've preached hundreds of sermons, and my mom has never heard me speak. And I remember sitting there and being like, this sucks. Like, this is really awful. And I remember feeling in my own little personal Job moment. So my family comes down, they come down for Christmas, and we're hanging out, everybody's in, and it's kind of this like, oh, it's this last Christmas moment. I mean, like, just raining gifts. Everybody's like trying to put on a smile, like we don't know what's going on, like we don't know what's happening. And then everybody would get through Christmas, and people don't want to leave, they don't want to go back to Arkansas, and so like, well, we're staying through New Year's. I'm sure like our neighborhood was like, are these cars ever leaving? And we're hanging out, and we get into New Year's. And we get into New Year's Eve, and here's the deal, and here's why I want to share this story. There will be very few times that I get really, really personal with you guys, and so I want to communicate this well. We get into New Year's, and I get a call from my friends. They're like, hey, let's go hang out. Let's go do stuff. And so I get a call from some of my friends who are in college. They graduated a year before me. I mean, I went to like youth ministry with them, no big deal. I'm like, yeah, let's go hang out. I tell my dad, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go see them. I'm going to come back. And we go, and we pull up in this house. And through high school, I didn't like party. I didn't go out, mostly because I didn't have friends. So I get invited to that kind of stuff. And I was trying to pursue the Lord, and I remember walking into this house with all this weight of everything terrible that's happening to me, and I walk in, and I mean, it is just more bottles of liquor than I've ever seen in my life on this table. And I walk in, and I was like, oh, no. And I'm looking at my friends that I grew up in youth ministry with, and I'm looking at them, and we're hanging out, and we're talking, and everyone knows, like, I'm the kid whose mom is dying. And a guy that I've ran cross-country with for all these years, that I went to youth ministry with, and he comes and puts his arm around me, and he goes, dude, your life is awful right now. So I know. Thank you for the reminder. And he goes, but we're going to forget all that. At my home, my whole family is spending their last New Year's with my mom. And I pick up the phone, and I call my dad. Hey, I'm not going to be home tonight. I'm hanging out with Brady. Click. And he's a dad who's got a bunch of stuff going on, and he doesn't even realize what's going on there. He says, oh, yeah, he just wants his kid to have fun in the midst of misery. And it was the first night that I drank, and I drank more than anyone there. And I don't say that to glorify that. I say that because it was the dumbest thing I've ever done. I remember going to bed that night, sleeping on a hardwood floor, looking up at the sky and going, what have I done? When everything was so incredibly awful, I sacrificed all of my integrity, all of my ministry to those people in order to avoid the struggle because life seemed too hard. And I'm 25, and I walk with that because everybody else in my house spent their last New Year's with my mom. And here's what's even harder about that. It felt like what took an eternity to get up off that floor, not just like metaphorically. I felt like I just sat in sin and struggle for a really long time after that night. But not 4 hours before that was I sitting in my kitchen, and my mom, who is dying, cancer is killing her to the point that 3 weeks later she would not even remember the names of the people standing around her. In her wheelchair, rolls into the kitchen as people are trying to serve her and love her and trying to make a good Christmas for her, and starts asking what she can do to cook and clean. And there's nothing that a brain cancer patient in a wheelchair can do to do any of those things. It was her Job moment too. And usually when we struggle and we fight and we get frustrated, when things get hard, we get selfish and we think about us and we fight for us. But not my mom, just 4 hours before I was going to be one of the most selfish I could ever be. She fought for other people. She fought to love God, and she fought to love people, and she did not lose sight of her integrity in the midst of death. But her son that she raised lost sight of it all and sacrificed all of his integrity in the effort to avoid pain. How we handle our struggles will define what kind of person we are in that moment. It will reveal who we are. As George and Truman come up and lead us in worship, when are you at your worst? Think about when you're at your worst, because that is when you're going to find out who you are and how closely you are walking with God. The difference between me and my mom in that moment is I was not walking with God nearly as close as I thought I was, but she was in the face of certain death. And I learned so much in that 24 hours about integrity and goodness and who my God is. But here's what I learned the most. Eventually, God comes and picks me up off that floor. And in his grace calls me back to himself and begins to fix and repair a broken teenage kid who feels so lost in the midst of all of it. And he calls him to other things, and he calls him to himself, and he cleans him up, and he fixes him up. That is the grace of Jesus. Not that we can continue to return back to sacrificing our integrity, but that he finds us in the midst of one of our lowest points, and he calls us to himself to be more, to live new life, to follow him. If that's not the Jesus that you know, I'm not are you saved or are you not saved? I mean, if that's not who you know Jesus to be, you need to talk to an adult or a friend tonight and find out, because that's who Jesus is. That he meets Job in the middle of his brokenness and he never leaves. He walks with him through the worst stuff, through terrible friends, through terrible family, through the loss of everything. That picks us up even when we make our own bad decisions, when we sacrifice our integrity, and he calls us back to himself, that he would clean us up and make us into new people. I'm going to pray for us, and then they're going to lead us in worship. Love you guys. Father, I thank you for tonight.